The second law of thermodynamics is best summarized by saying everything moves toward disorder, a condition known as entropy.
It's more complicated than that. See, when you say disorder, not everybody's going to know what you're talking about. So to summarize it, the second law of thermodynamics more accurately states that throughout a process, all of the bodies involved will be less and less able to be converted back into the state in which it previously was, at least without external work.
This bears some explanation. Remember, evolutionists teach that everything is constantly evolving into a higher and more complex order. They believe things continue to get better and better instead of worse and worse.
That's not what evolution states at all. Evolution simply states that organisms can change over time. That's it. Coupled with natural selection, it implies that over time, animals will change into things that are more likely to survive. And it just so happens that within our system, more complex organisms were more likely to survive. And that's why we see more complex organisms. But if the circumstances were different and less complicated organisms were more likely to survive, we'd see less and less complicated organisms. And this wouldn't disprove evolution, it would support it. But you're trying to tie this into the second law of thermodynamics, but you fail to understand that the Earth is an open system. We receive low entropy energy coming from the sun, and we give off high entropy energy.
If water on a stove is at 150 degrees Fahrenheit and the burner is turned off, the temperature drops instead of rises. It moves toward colder, not hotter.
Yes, that's true, and the second law of thermodynamics does state that that happens as the system moves towards equilibrium. But this sort of system isn't comparable to biological mechanisms.
Balls on hills always roll down, not up.
Yes, because that's an act of gravity, which is a spontaneous action. Biological organisms are not spontaneous, and the second law of thermodynamics deals with spontaneous actions.
Energy to perform any task changes from usable to unusable during the task.
Yes, kinda sorta. But like I said, the Earth is an open system in which we are receiving lots and lots of low entropy energy.
It will always go from a higher energy level to a lower one, where less and less energy is available.
In a spontaneous process. That's a very important stipulation that you're leaving out.
Applied to the universe, the second law of thermodynamics reveals that the universe is winding down, moving toward disorder, entropy, not winding up or moving toward more perfect order and structure.
Here's where he starts using that term disorder in a grossly overgeneralized manner. And yes, the universe is increasing in levels of entropy, but this doesn't mean that natural processes can't occur, it just means that the universe will eventually die a heat death.
Even evolutionists admit that the theory of evolution and this law are completely incompatible. Notice.
Funny how you make such a false claim about evolutionist belief and then go on to quote a young Earth creationist who was widely criticized for, get this, grossly misrepresenting scientific ideas.
Regarding the second law of thermodynamics, universally accepted scientific law, which states that all things left to themselves will tend to run down,
again, that's a poor way of putting it,
or the law of entropy, it is observed, it would hardly be possible to conceive of two more completely opposite principles than this principle of entropy increase and the principle of evolution. Each is precisely the converse of the other.
No, it's not. That is, unless you follow your strawman version of thermodynamics. But as far as science is concerned, biological organisms act according to the second law of thermodynamics. We eat food to get the chemical energy with low entropy, and we convert that into physical heat, which has high entropy. In order to combat this, we have to eat more food.
As Aldous Huxley defined it,
not a scientist, just a writer.
Evolution involves a continual increase of order, of organization, of size, of complexity.
Again, not true. Evolution is just the changing of organisms over time. It just so happens that it has increased in complexity.
It seems axiomatic that both cannot possibly be true. But there is no question whatever that the second law of thermodynamics is true.
And there's hardly any real question as to whether or not evolution is true. Problem is, you don't understand this second law. It's not talking about the organization of the universe or of biological organisms, but instead the progression of spontaneous processes.
Like a top or a yo-yo, the universe must have been wound up. Since it is constantly winding down, the second law of thermodynamics begs a great question. Who wound it up? The only plausible answer, God.
Or no one. Remember last episode where I talked about how before the Big Bang, all the mass and energy in the universe was held in an infinitely dense state? Yeah, that state, the singularity, had pretty much no entropy. As to how it got to that state, nobody really knows, but I'd venture to say that it was always like that.
We have established that creation demands a creator. Now some amazing scientific proofs of creation.
Oh no.